Want to say a few words about Musk's announcement that AI 5 is ready and that there is a pathway towards convergence with AI 6, 7, 8, 9, and convergent meaning that will have training and inference converging into one chip architecture. I think this is one of those things that as an investor, you have to take very seriously. You can be cynical about it. Some people might think that he's diverting from maybe the current car business, which is not doing well. Other people, including us, see it as a typical Musk move. You know, the one superpower that Elon Musk has is that he is able to see around the corner and put infrastructure in place that is necessary to deliver against the strategy that currently most people don't even understand. So in this case, this is akin to the battery strategy that he chose when he built Giga Nevada. For those who have been around for a while, you might remember there was a time when 50 gigawatt hour of battery capacity was more than all the battery capacity in the world together. And back then, the main battery capacity, I think this is like 2014, maybe 2000, something like that, 13, 14, maybe 15, in those realms. And yeah, so most battery capacity back then, lithium-ion battery capacity, was going into iPhones and laptops, and the car business, of course, dwarfed. It was much bigger, had much bigger requirements. So Musk decided to build a massive gigafactory in Nevada with the help of Panasonic, and a lot of people questioned that. We didn't, because it was necessary to build that if you wanted electric cars to scale up. And fast forward today, we are at a point where we have huge capacity, mainly coming from China, but also Tesla themselves have massive battery capacity. They also are building the 4680. They are building the Semi now. They have a huge energy business. So there's a lot of battery capacity needed, and the prediction was right. And if you don't have that kind of capacity, then it's just not possible to compete. You can buy it from the Chinese, but there's issues with that. And anyway, now the actual chip strategy is here very similar. Now, there's two massive important components I think that I want to talk about here. One is the requirements for Tesla specifically, and I want to focus on useful compute. So when you do inference compute on edge, so on the robot itself, whether it's a car or Optimus, you are constrained with doing enough compute to solve the problem, but you don't want to do more because you have wattage, cost, and memory constraints. I'm going to talk about this. And then there's the convergence point. Maybe a third point I want to talk about is space AI. This is not even on podcast. It's January 19, 2026. This is Krim Dalko. For the year, we're down 2.5%. The market's up 1 and 1.2. We're underperforming by 3.7%. So the announcement that came out over the weekend is that Tesla is, in Musk put on X, that AI 5 is ready, and that is allows for Dojo 3 to restart. Now, why is this important? First, why is AI 5 crucial? What does Dojo 3 have to do with this? And why is Musk making why he's making this announcement? So he's been talking about AI 5 for a while now. According to this post, he's been actually working on AI 5 on at least on a weekly basis, and focusing really on that problem. Now, what's the problem and why is it relevant for Tesla? The problem with AI 5 is you want to build an inference architecture that can support scale and also the AI necessities that a self-driving car, an FSD, an unsupervised Cybercab type FSD will have to deal with. And that is not just driving, but it will also include semantics. The details are a bit sparse here, so we don't know exactly what kind of architectural decisions they made and why this was such a big problem. But fundamentally, you can kind of dissect the inference problem into three buckets. One is hardware, one is software, and one is system. Hardware being, for example, what the TPU architecture did at Google, which is you want to focus on, you look at the actual math that is happening in, let's say, in your particular problem, which, you know, if you're using any kind of transformer-based architecture or convolutional architecture, you have a lot of linear algebra and particularly matrix multiplications to deal with. So you want to, you know, hard code those or hardwire those in the chip. So the TPU is one of those, and NVIDIA offers similar opportunities, but it's more flexible because it has a layer of software in between that allows you to flexibly allocate, you know, jobs to the chip. In case of Tesla, that's not necessary. I think you know roughly what kind of math you're going to have to do, so you can design the chips accordingly. The software solutions are things like quantization or distillation. So in other words, you take a model with lots and lots of parameters, and then you cut the precision of those models because you don't need that kind of precision. Distillation would be you're distilling the model that you trained, which is huge, into a smaller sort of student model that can still do the job. And you know, another interesting thing, in my opinion, is the memory thing, which is one of the biggest bottlenecks. You just look at the memory stocks; they almost doubled in the first 2 weeks of this year. So memory is becoming a massive bottleneck here. DRAM and SRAM and things like that. The NVIDIA Grok deal, GROQ, is being rumored to be mainly driven by the fact that Grok is offering SRAM-based inference, and therefore NVIDIA can, you know, sort of use that as a spillover from the constrained high bandwidth memory situation that is being supplied by Micron and others. Now, why is memory such a bottleneck? Memory is a bottleneck because you have to think about it this way. If you do inference, you're tapping the model. You're asking, you know, every time you're prompted with a situation, you're asking, okay, which parameters should I use to solve the problem? And what Musk said in several posts is he wants to increase the useful compute. So you don't want to just go back and forth and use memory that actually doesn't yield to useful compute. You just want to use the kind of memory that yields useful compute. So in practice, if the FSD sees a road and a highway, and then all of a sudden a deer in front of the highway, it wants to be able to tap exactly the kinds of weights and parameters that deal with the deer, and it doesn't have to deal with parameters that deal with sunsets and oceans and trees and things like that. So that would be software level. The system level situation. System level is a little bit more technical and probably doesn't really apply to AI5. It will apply though to Dojo 3 and space compute, which is the next thing I'm going to discuss. So to summarize, the AI5 and plus. So when we say AI5, according to Musk, we're going to have AI 6, 7, 8. So this whole trajectory of AI for Tesla is really meant to create an ASIC, an application-specific integrated circuit that allows to solve for the exact problems that Tesla's going to deal with. Now, to be very frank here, Tesla, like everybody else, cannot just build massive specified silicon here, because it's not so clear what the models will look like in the future. It's also not so clear what kind of requirements you have. Is the car going to have to use more grok? Are people you want to talk to the car? Do you need voice? So is entertainment and intelligence going to morph? Particularly with Cybercab, that's probably going to be a case. So you want to keep some flexibility also with the AI, and I think that is, I guess, the design problem. That's why computer architecture is such an interesting field. It's really like architecture. You can't just, nothing's written in stone. Everything has to stay in a certain way flexible, but clearly you have to optimize along the three big vectors, which is wattage, cost, and memory. Now let's talk about the next thing that Musk spoke about, which is Dojo 3 and the convergence. So what does that mean? What he means with that is that eventually he wants to be able to produce AI, let's say 7 or 8, one of the iterations will be as far advanced that you can use the chip for inference and training. Now, what's the difference between inference and training? Inference has certain optimization problems. You want to have very low latency. You can't use a lot of wattage. You want to have low weight, and you need high. I mean, one of the corollaries here is you need very, very high useful compute rates here. You can't download a massive model here with trillions of parameters on the car. It's too expensive, too heavy, too much wattage, all of that stuff. So you want to be very efficient here. Versus on training, you can use more power. Costs are, I mean, everything is a constraint, but it's not a killer. You can use a lot of power, particularly if you do solar power or in the future space. So power is not such a big constraint. Cost is always a constraint, but it's not in a sense that you can, the unit costs are not as high because you're training a foundation model here that can be used in many ways. Latency is not such a big issue here, and you can do interconnect and things along those lines. For example, you can train also in space, and then latency is not such a big deal. So those two spaces, inference and training, are separate right now, and they will converge according to Musk. So, and the idea, the way that this can be done is through stacking and software solutions. So let's say you have a stacked chip of AI 8, and then you use software to say, now I'm doing inference, so distill everything down, just use the useful compute and lower the precision. Now I'm doing training, so now, undo all these things. I need high precision. I'm not concerned about latency and things like that. I can use more memory. Maybe I don't have to have such high useful compute ratios. So that's the idea of convergence. I'm a bit vague here, partly because I'm not a computer architect myself, so I think this requires a little more technical know-how, and partly also because I think Tesla is being very, very tight-lipped about this. But I want to say one thing. That a few years ago I learned from a Stanford seminar, and that is that one of the big problems of whether it's TPUs or Cerberus and all these specialized chip companies, they just don't have the kind of flexibility on the compiler front that NVIDIA offers with CUDA, and that's one of the big problems. And if you hear other people talk about the ability to deploy NVIDIA at scale is always choice number one because of flexibility and software enabled solutions. So NVIDIA is not perfect, but they have a real stronghold on the market because they just deliver the lowest cost per token and the lowest watt per token on training. Now, Musk wants to beat that. And I think one of the most important things actually in this whole conversation is scale and volume. Why? And this brings me back to the beginning when I spoke about battery. What Musk is envisioning is billions of Optimus and millions of cars, Cybercabs driving around the world. For that, you need a lot of chips. And the current chip industry is not able to provide that. They're not investing in the kinds of manufacturing capacity to build those chips. Interestingly, though, Musk is not going to be able to rely on China as much as he was able to rely on solar and battery because chips is a bit more sensitive and there's a lot of trade barriers and things like that. Now, that might go away, but it's just an interesting point to make. The last thing I want to talk about now is, last but not least, of course, is space AI, which is something maybe that eventually also Musk mentioned is going to happen. Now, what does space AI actually mean? It means AI data centers in space for training. They probably will have to be for training mainly because of latency. Now, there are certain workloads that can be also used for inference up there, but it's mainly for training. And we're talking here about scales that are unprecedented on Earth. That's why they have to go in space. Up there, you have no Nimby problems, and you also have, at least in principle, a solution for cooling. So you're not as power constrained as you are on Earth. Plus, you have abundant power with solar. What's interesting about this is that you have certain conditions that have to be met. For example, it has to be rad hard, so radiation hard. So you have to build chips that can sustain massive radiation. Now, to be fair, that's already happening. We already have satellites, we have Starlink. So it's not like the industry has never thought about this. But of course, nobody's doing AI training in space, so it requires a different level of chip design, which is interesting. I think just sort of as a side note, what that exactly means right now for us Tesla investors, I think it's really not that key because that's probably 4 to 5 years out. But it's just interesting how these types of things might tie into a long-term strategy that actually is relevant. And we can't neglect these things. We've said this before. We think that space AI is a massive opportunity for SpaceX and for Tesla, because it can combine two companies and give them purpose and consequence in a very large market, and therefore also drive this whole space exploration technology forward. So to summarize, I think we took our time to discuss Musk's comments on AI5 and further, so AI5 plus. We discussed the requirements that Tesla has for inference compute. We then discussed the idea of convergence, maybe 7, 8, and Dojo 3, the restart of Dojo 3, which will be geared towards convergence so that you can use the same chip for training and for inference, and that the difference will be mainly driven by software and software allocation and things like that. And then lastly, we spoke about the AI data centers in space and the new requirements there that could also be driven by that are driving innovations on the AI chip front and are huge business opportunities for both SpaceX and Tesla. Thank you.